This is episode 93. No, sure, for some reasons. Well, not yet, definitely. If I can assume, visually, of course. If I can assume, visually, of course. Wait a minute. Show the hedgehog? I know. If I can assume, visually, of course. I know. 'Cause you didn't notice. Yep. Okay. If I can assume, visually. I know, right? Yeah, yep. No, sure, visually. Oh, not yet, visually. Okay, because you're not sure? Oh, not yet. If I can assume, visually. Of course. Knew this was supposed to happen. Yeah, yep. And how do you know this? Oh, not yet, visually. If I can assume. Of course. You have no idea. I know. If I can assume, visually. Of course. Sure you realize that? Oh, not yet, definitely. Of course. Knew this was supposed to happen. Yep. 'Cause you didn't know this? Nope. If I can see it visually. Of course. I know, right? If I can see it visually. 'Cause I didn't know this. 'Cause you could see it visually. I know, because you didn't know this? Nope. If I can assume visually. Of course. I know, right? Yep. Because you didn't know this? Nope. If I can assume visually. It's a little bit familiar. I guess I was right. Yep. And how do you know this? Well, not yet, definitely. Okay. Guess that is true. Yep. If I was gonna know this. If I can assume visually. Of course. I know, right? If I can assume visually. I know, because you didn't know this? Yep. Right. Of course. You have no idea. I know, eventually. If I can assume visually. Okay. Because you didn't know this? No. If I can assume eventually. Of course. I know. If I can assume visually. Of course. I know, definitely. You have no idea. I know, right? Yep. If I can assume visually. Of course. You have no idea. I know. If I can assume. You have no idea, right? Yep. If I can assume visually. Of course. Yeah, we get some ideas.